You remember the moment. Maybe you were 7, maybe younger. You ran into the room with something, a drawing, a grade, a story about something that happened that felt enormous inside your small body. And you said, "Look," and the room didn't look. Not cruelly. Nobody pushed you away. Nobody told you to be quiet. The room just continued. The conversation kept going. The television stayed on. The phone stayed in their hand. And you stood there holding whatever you came in with, waiting for the moment that never arrived. And then you put it down, quietly, without being asked to, and you walked away. And that moment, that one quiet, unremarkable moment that nobody remembers because nothing dramatic happened, began to teach you something. Something that took years to learn fully, but that your nervous system started understanding. Right then, what I feel is not enough to change what's happening in the room I'm in. You learn to stop holding up drawings. You learn to need less, to feel less visibly, to handle things alone before anyone noticed. You were struggling to handle them, and people called it maturity. But it wasn't maturity, it was a child disappearing quietly so no one would have to notice. They were gone. Being ignored as a child doesn't always look like neglect. That's the part most people miss. It doesn't require absent parents. It doesn't require cruelty or addiction or any of the dramatic circumstances that people associate with childhood trauma. Sometimes it requires nothing more than a parent who was exhausted, who was carrying pain they never processed, who loved their child genuinely, but didn't know how to make that love visible in the specific way. A child needs to feel it, and the child, who cannot understand any of that context, makes the only conclusion available from the evidence in front of them. I am not important enough to interrupt whatever else is happening. That conclusion doesn't stay in childhood, it travels into adulthood, into every relationship, into every moment someone offers attention, and the person who learned to stop expecting it doesn't quite know how to receive it. Here are 6 things that happen to the ignored child that follow them long after the house they grew up in is far behind them. When a child reaches for connection and is met with silence, the brain doesn't register indifference. It registers threat, not metaphorically, neurologically. The stress response activates. Cortisol floods the body. The nervous system, which is still forming, still deciding what the world is and what to expect from it, records what just happened and begins to predict it. Because prediction is how the brain protects itself. If you expect the silence, you can prepare for the silence. If you stop needing before the need goes unmet, the disappointment becomes smaller. John Bowlby, the psychologist who founded attachment theory, spent decades documenting this process. His conclusion was precise. Children whose bids for connection are consistently not met don't just feel disappointment in the moment. Their nervous system reorganizes itself around the expectation of absence. The baseline shifts. Anxiety becomes normal. Hypervigilance becomes automatic. The body stays in a low-level alert, scanning for signals about whether this moment is safe or whether this is another moment to become smaller, and this baseline doesn't reset when childhood ends. The adult who grew up ignored walks into a perfectly safe room, and their nervous system is still running the same scan it ran in every room when they were 7. Still checking, still preparing, still waiting for the moment when the room stops having space for what they need. There is a progression. It doesn't happen in one moment. The child tries first. Of course they do. They bring the excitement. They share the feeling. They hold up the drawing. They start the story. And when the response doesn't come, or comes distracted, or comes too briefly to hold the weight of what the child was offering, they try again. Because children try again, that's what they do. But the trying has a limit. And when the limit is reached, not through one dramatic moment, but through the slow accumulation of moments that didn't land, the child makes an adjustment. They stop bringing things out. Not because the feelings stopped. The feelings never stopped. They went underground, to a place where they couldn't be, ignored or missed or handled wrong, because they were never shown at all. And years pass, and the child becomes an adult. And the adult is in a room with people who genuinely want to know how they are, and they say, "I'm fine." Not because nothing is happening inside, because everything that's happening inside, learn a long time ago that the inside was the only safe place to stay. Something develops in place of the security that consistent attention would have built. A skill. The ignored child becomes extraordinarily good at reading people, not because they were born perceptive, though sometimes that's part of it, but because reading the room was necessary for survival. When you cannot predict whether the emotional atmosphere will have space for you, you learn to evaluate it before you decide whether to take up any space at all. You track tone, you read micro-expression. You notice the specific quality of a silence and know, before anything is said, whether this is safe or whether this is the kind of moment where becoming smaller is the better option. This produces something that looks from the outside like emotional intelligence. The ignored child grows into the adult, who always knows how everyone in the room is feeling. Who senses the shift before it's visible? Who holds other people's pain with remarkable steadiness? But here is what never gets said. While they are reading everyone else, they have almost no practice reading themselves. While they are tracking everyone else's needs, their own are still going underground, the way they learned to decades ago. The person everyone goes to with everything is often the person who goes to no one with anything, not because they don't need, because needing still feels like the thing they were quietly taught not to do. The ignored child grows up and enters relationships, carrying everything. Every unmet need, every conclusion drawn in silence, every bone-deep expectation that the person in front of them will eventually stop showing up. And this creates a pattern that shows up in almost every significant relationship they have. Sometimes it looks like pursuit, a reaching so fast and so full that it overwhelms the other person because it was never really about them. It was about 3 decades of accumulated hunger, finally finding an opening and moving through it with the full weight of everything that was never given. Sometimes it looks like distance, a half presence, being there, but not fully, loving someone while remaining just far enough away that when they leave, it won't be a total surprise. One hand reaching forward, one already positioned at the door. Both patterns come from the same root. The learned certainty that love is something that disappears, that needs drive people away, that the safest version of wanting something is the version where nobody can see how much you want it. A study published in the Journal of Child Psychology and Psychiatry found that emotional neglect in childhood is strongly linked to chronic loneliness in adulthood, regardless of how many people are in the person's life, regardless of how many people are in their life. They can be surrounded and still feel that particular loneliness of someone who learned that being in a room doesn't mean being reached. Some ignored children become exceptional, not despite the ignoring, because of it. If warmth and presence were not reliably available, but achievement occasionally produced a reaction, a glance, a brief moment of being noticed, the brain learns fast. Performance gets a response. Doing exceptional things is the closest available substitute for being seen. And so the child builds higher grades, more accomplishments, better performance, chasing a feeling that the achievement keeps promising but never quite delivers, because the achievement was never the actual goal. The goal was the acknowledgement that was supposed to arrive with it. And even when it does arrive, even when people notice, even when the success is real and visible and externally validated, something is wrong. It doesn't land, not the way it was supposed to. Not the way it would have landed if the child had first learned that they were worth something before they had to prove it. So the achievement continues, always one more thing, always one more level, always the quiet suspicion that the current accomplishment isn't quite enough to finally produce the feeling they have been chasing since they were a child, holding up a drawing in a room that didn't look. Healing for the ignored child does not begin with confidence. It does not begin with deciding to love yourself more. It begins somewhere smaller and more specific. It begins with the recognition that what happened was real, because the ignored child almost always spends years minimizing their own experience, comparing it to people who had it worse, telling themselves nothing that bad actually happened, so whatever they're feeling probably isn't legitimate. But the absence of something essential is itself a wound. It is like spending childhood in a house where the temperature was always slightly too cold. Nothing dramatic, no single unbearable moment, just a persistent chill that taught the body to brace and to expect. That warmth was not something reliably available. Healing begins the first time you stop explaining away the cold and admit that you were cold. From there, through real relationships, where needs are expressed and met, through moments of being heard that feel unfamiliar at first, because they are, the nervous system slowly updates, not overnight, not all at once, but every time you speak, and someone stays, every time you need something, and the world doesn't punish you for it, every time you take up space and nobody asks you to disappear, something registers in a nervous system that has been waiting for this evidence for a very long time. You put the drawing down and walked away. And nobody noticed you leave, and you told yourself for years that it didn't matter, that it was a small thing, that other people had it harder, that you were fine. But you were not fine. You were a child who needed to be seen in a room that was looking somewhere else. And the part of you that learned to be invisible to avoid the pain of being overlooked again has been protecting you ever since. From asking too much, from needing too openly, from holding up anything that might go unnoticed. That protection kept you safe in a house that required it. But you are not in that house anymore. The drawing is still there, the one you put down, the one you stopped holding up, because nobody looked often enough for it to feel worth trying. You were allowed to hold it up again, not because someone is guaranteed to look, but because you finally are worth the risk of being seen. The room was wrong, not you. It was never you.